we were that kind of country, I'd be more worried. But given where we are now, I'm not. And I think the benefit that will come from this, from putting people off from this type of crime, and just helping people with that, God, the frustration. My husband's bike got stolen from a bike lock place in Ealing Broadway Town Centre, where you're supposed to park and ride or whatever it's called, and there's absolutely nothing he can do. So that feeling that actually you can action this and you can get your possessions back, I think is worth it.
Yeah. Well, we're going to be talking a lot more about this after 9 o'clock, getting your views on it. So if you have strong views on that, you can book your call now on 0345 6060 973. Let's do this one quickly, 45 seconds each. It's a text question from Luke. Environment Secretary Steve Reed didn't get a great reception at today's National Farmers Union conference, but he said he's listening to farmers. Do you think he is? Jeevan, I'm not going to come to you first because you're obviously going to say yes. Let's go to Ashley first.
No, he's not listening. And in fact, the Treasury had the NFU and others in for talks last week. Specifically, one assumed to offer some sort of concession to this awful policy, and they offered nothing at all, just justification that the government was right. I think the policy is a disaster. It hurts our food security. It will hurt family farms. The government should change its mind.
Yeah. I think that's been disproven, hasn't it? The amount of farms that are going to be hit by this inheritance tax change is minimal.
Well, that's the Treasury guidance. That's not what the farmers say.
Explain to me, I don't understand how in this country where we can look at young people who've got smartphones or people on benefits who've got flat screen TV and we can call them, that they've got too much and we can take from them, but we can't expect farmers to pay the same inheritance tax as everyone else.
What you don't understand is that farming is capital intensive.
Not so many aren't. The Jeremy Clarkson example, so many of these farms are bought to avoid paying inheritance tax. Those people need to be
Very few farms are bought for that purpose. But imagine you have a farm worth £5 million. You have an allowance of £3 million, so you're going to pay 20% tax on £2 million. That's £400,000. Now
over 10 years.
Now let's imagine that farm, 5 million capital value, is producing a return of about 1%. That's 50,000 a year, on which you'll pay income tax. You have to pay that tax bill of £400,000 out of an income of 50,000 a year.
Yeah.
That is all your income for the next 8 years, and you have to live. And I'm afraid what you demonstrate is the lack of understanding that the Treasury shows as to how farming is financed.
Yeah.
And it's people that don't understand that are making these decisions. And this is why the farmers in my constituency are so livid with the Treasury.
Yeah.
They simply don't understand what's going on.
Just to add to that, I mean, everything I was going to say, you've just said.
Thank you.
And having a Secretary of State, and I love Croydon. I was a parliamentary candidate in 2017. I ran against Steve Reed. But having a Secretary of State from Croydon,
Not many farms in Croydon.
Not many farms at all. Being responsible for such an important area is probably a challenge, and I think he's showing his ignorance.
Yes.
Farmers have had to contend with, yes, we left the European Union, whatever your views on that, but the loss of cap payments, they're having to adjust to a new normal. They've had inflation to engage with, supermarkets having price wars they've had to contend with. They've had a torrid time over the last few years. This is not going to help to encourage them to continue to try and be good farmers. And in terms of the overall volume, some people say it's about 500 farms, others say up to 70,000. The reality is one farm could be 70, 80, 100, 200 acres. You're not talking about, someone's house and whether or not they're paying inheritance on that when they live in London or whatever. The context between urban and rural couldn't be more striking, and so there's a need for better understanding.
And the case for the defence.
Well, of course, first of all, Steve Reed's portfolio is farming, rural affairs. I think that stops him, but also environment as well. And we should also say, during the flooding, for example, I had it very badly in my constituency. Steve came there, so actually Steve is the Secretary of State for the whole department. Daniel Zeichner, who is the farming minister, of course, was our only rural MP at the last election.
So that's Cambridge. That's not exactly rural.
Oh, no, but he has the area outside. So he's come from a farming.
But didn't he say that farming wasn't anywhere near the top of Labour's priorities? It wasn't very helpful.
I don't know
87
those
words in
comments
the manifesto.
but more broadly on this side of it, to get into the nub of it, yes, we are listening, and also about the investments we're making to help people produce more on their farms. 5 billion over the next 2 years. The most defined budget has been, so I guess 200 million on animal veterinary services, another 100 million on other measures. The measures we're taking, if you like, are to increase productivity, but of course we are listening to farmers because they grow our food. It's really important, and actually they care for the environment, and they understand a lot more than most of us think about the way in which climate change is damaging us all.
Food security.
But the problem is that farmers don't feel that he's listening.
Oh,
There is, and that's where I think, successful politicians at least manage to give the impression that they're listening, even if they're not. And I think Steve Reed isn't giving the impression that he's listening. That's what the farmers think anyway.
Well, Steve was there today at the NFU. He's gone around, I think, engaging quite a lot. He is very much listening. He does very much care. On the other side of it, look, we started this show talking about development and actually some of the trade-offs that we had, and I think we are trying to explain those trade-offs while also investing and supporting people in our country.
Right, we will move on in just a moment, and we will have our, Ashley hasn't experienced this yet, but our famous fun question at the end of the programme.
Well, I mean, Dan's right. In an ideal world, that is what the national interest is about, although successive politicians have failed to live up to that. Whether Annalise Dodds was informed very late, I don't know. I mean, she is, to be fair, she's only a junior minister. That, you know, aid is controlled by the Foreign Office, has been since 2021. So whether the Foreign Secretary was briefed more thoroughly and longer ago, I don't know. It is unfortunate that we live in a political culture in which things leak, and prime ministers are understandably keen to play their cards very close to their chest. Ultimately, spending is a matter for the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, but undoubtedly, you know, this timing is not coincidental. This is to do with the Prime Minister seeing Donald Trump on Thursday. This is to do with the US having said last week before the Munich Security Conference that it was pivoting away from European security and that essentially Europe was on its own. You know, we shouldn't run away from the fact that this is happening because of an outside set of circumstances, but it had to happen. And I think the important factor is that spending 2.5% on defence is not transforming our military capabilities. It's getting us back to where we already say we are, because we're currently working on assumptions that we can't fulfill, and we have to make those back before we go anywhere else.
Look, thank you to both of you. Really interesting debate there. Elliot Wilson, writer and commentator, strategic advisor, and Dan Paskins, interim executive director of Save the Children. Thanks for being with us. And a Ukrainian government source has told them that Ukraine has agreed terms with the United States on a minerals deal. The accord, once signed, could unlock a new long-term partnership between Kyiv and the White House after weeks of, well, increasingly tense exchanges between the pair. The source said there was a plan for the document to be signed very soon. That could be during a face-to-face meeting between the Ukrainian president and Volodymyr Zelensky, and we're also hearing that will come this week. Zelensky is to head to Washington this week, as we understand it, via our colleagues at Sky News. An update there, the latest lines on this conflict. Now then, in the paper there's coverage of the defence spending increase, soft parenting, and the little-known benefits of having a cuppa. Jeremy Griffin is the executive editor for The Times and Times Radio.
Well, Sir Keir Starmer delivered this statement in the House on I suppose, one of the few subjects that can be described as more important to Britain than the health service, which was the other big news of the morning. The fact that Amanda Pritchard was standing down as chief executive. It wasn't an enormous surprise, his defence statement. We heard that the Prime Minister was going to announce an increase in defence spending, and so he did. He raised it from 2.3% to 2.5% of GDP by 2027. The announcement coming before his meeting with President Trump in Washington on Thursday. No coincidence there, I think. It means that Britain will spend £13.4 billion on defence every year from 2027. Sir Keir said that the government will set out a clear ambition for defence spending to rise to 3% of GDP in the next Parliament, subject, of course, to economic and fiscal conditions. Now, he said he'd pay for the increase, the increase that he announced today, to 2.5 by reducing funding for overseas aid from 0.5% of gross national income to 0.3% by 2027. That is not an announcement I'm happy to make, he said, and also unhappy with those in the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office who work on overseas aid, because one of the other stories we'll be running in tomorrow's paper is that they were made aware of the budget cut only yesterday, and that after days of denials that an announcement on defence spending was on the cards. The Prime Minister also said that the country's whole approach to national security must change, with British industry, universities, businesses and people people asked to play a bigger part, and he went into that again in some more detail in a press conference later on today. He promised to translate defence spending into British growth, jobs, skills and innovation. That's what the security of our country needs now, he explained. And on that note, there will be another very interesting article by the Times Defence editor Larissa Brown in tomorrow's newspaper. This looks at the state of Britain's military capabilities and how 2.5% will help and will make it very eye-catching with headings and graphics. So I do recommend that. We'll also compare.
Because that's a big question, isn't it? What does this 2.5% look like in terms of equipment, personnel, strategy?
Yeah, exactly. So we'll try and make that tangible.
Yeah.
For
you said it's
readers.
13 billion a year. There's a bit of debate about the fact that the decrease in foreign aid budget would actually be 6 billion a year rather than 13 billion.
Exactly. So there's an argument going on at the moment over the math, basically, and we'll explain that in the articles in tomorrow's paper as well. The Prime Minister might also be less than happy to learn that the Times sketch writer was watching and listening to him. Tom Peck gave the Prime Minister a really hard time, actually, for his address to diplomats in Ukraine yesterday in the piece that appeared in this morning's paper. It'd be interesting to see how Tom thinks the Prime Minister did today.
Britain's strictest head teacher, Catherine Birbalsingh, she's been on Times Radio a fair few times. Some think she's quite harsh. Many others think she just speaks common sense. She runs the Michaela Community School. And she's having a go at parents in the Times.
Yeah, she's never commented on whether she has children of her own, but if she does, she might well be the country's strictest parent as well. Kate Nicola Wilcox interviewed Catherine Birbalsingh for tomorrow's Times. During their conversation, the head teacher made clear that she thought parenting guidance written by the middle classes was destroying the raising, I suppose you put it, of working class children. She said parents should stop giving their children choices in food and clothes and instead embrace being authority figures. She decried the impossibility of finding traditional parenting books like those that were enjoyed in the 1960s, which gave parents permission to tell their children what to do or teach them right from wrong. And she told Nicola that the culture and the language that's being used means parents feel that they're not in a position of authority over their child. On parenting books itself, which she got really hot on the colour about, she said the stuff you'll get nowadays will be much more along the lines of gentle parenting, becoming friends with your children, not holding them to account. It'll be written from the point of view of allowing them to choose to lead their own feeding, for instance. That same idea goes through everything. And on tantrums, she thinks we're too easy on kids there as well. Books from decades ago, she said, would have given parents more agency and have an understanding of, and this is her phrase, having dominion over their child. Parents, she said, have been undermined by the culture, which is partly shaped by the literature that we've got, but also just by the general advice. They are being infantilised. So, yeah, no holding back. And if she wants to come around my house this evening, she's more than welcome to do so.
What do you think about gentle parenting?
I think... That's a good question.
Do your children listen to this?
They certainly don't. What do I think about gentle parenting? I think if you can have a mix of what might be described as gentle parenting and also some strictures, I think.
Children like boundaries and structures because it makes them feel safe. I think so, anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So I think in this interview, Catherine Birbalsingh makes the point that if you're in a family, traditional nuclear family where you've got a mother and a father present, that basically one can play good cop, one can play bad cop, and that.
Who is it in your family then? Come on.
Well, I have to say it does normally fall to me to be the bad cop, but it's really
interesting. Are you lodging an official complaint?
No, of course not. I would
on the airwaves.
Dream of this would not be the time and place to do so. But yeah, and the thing is, I don't get annoyed with my children very often. But when I do get annoyed with them, I find that they don't really take me seriously. So obviously I'm not doing it quite right. Do you
think I take you? Yes, I do take you seriously.
I'm not sure about that, Kate.
I'm not your child. I had so many discussions with parenting friends when our kids were growing up, when they'd be like, I don't understand why my daughter's whinging about this, and then I let her do this, and I did. And often just a good thing is just to remind yourself who is in charge. Who's in charge of this situation? Is it you as the parent, or is it the child? And that always used to, not that I get it wrong loads, right? But that always used to help me. The child shouldn't be in charge of that situation. You should as the parent.
Yeah, I think that's a good rule of thumb. But also another rule of thumb is not to beat yourself up too much. Parenting isn't straightforward or easy, as we all find on a day-to-day basis.
Pick your battles wisely. That's what my mum told me. Should we talk about a daily cup of tea?
it could be a daily cup of tea, it could be more frequently than that. You might enjoy it, Kate. And if you do, you're not just perking yourself up, you're purging the water that you drink of toxic heavy metals. I wonder what they're doing there in the first place. But researchers have found that tea leaves trap lead, cadmium and other unwanted contaminants that are in the water during the brewing process. These metals bind to the leaves and remain there until they're thrown away. Benjamin Schindel of Northwestern University in Illinois led the research. He said that while other materials might achieve a similar effect, tea's popularity makes it unique. All you need to do, he said, is put the leaves in the water and steep them, and they naturally remove metals. Now, researchers suggested a connection between illnesses including cardiovascular disease and exposure to heavy metals. It could help explain why populations that drink more tea may have lower incidence rates of heart diseases and stroke. So there's an interesting facet to this study that you might not otherwise have thought of. And interestingly, Schindel and colleagues explored how brewing methods affected heavy metal removal. The longer the steeping time, the more contaminants were removed. A tea bag left in the cup for 3 minutes removed about 15% of a lead solution in testing, for instance. So the message is don't just brew longer.
There we go. I thought you were going to talk about exposure to heavy metal then, but that's
I was never a fan.
entirely different thing, isn't it? Jeremy Griffin, there you go. Thank you. These stories, if they're not up online already, then they soon will be. And do look out for the Times' brilliant coverage across this increase by Keir Starmer today. We'll also talk about gentle middle-class parenting and how one head teacher's had enough of it. All that on the way. We've got Zoe Strimple and Michael Binion with us. That is after the news with James Kitchen.
Thank you, Kate. Good evening. The Prime Minister has announced plans to boost defence spending ahead of his critical meeting with President Trump on Thursday. Sir Keir Starmer has announced the MOD budget is increasing from its current 2.3% share of GDP to 2.5% by 2027. The Prime Minister claims that's an extra £13.4 billion a year for the armed forces. The former Chief of the General Staff, General Lord Dannatt, told Times Radio this has been a long time coming, but the tanker is beginning to change direction.
We've eventually got there after many years of cajoling, commenting, analysing and trying to persuade successive governments that we need to spend more money. Today's Tuesday, he's going to Washington on Thursday. At least he's got something that he can say to Donald Trump that's indicative of the Europeans now taking a greater responsibility for our insecurity while the Americans dial down. We will hopefully dial up.
The Prime Minister also unveiled plans to boost spending for the intelligence services and set out a pathway to increase defence spending to 3% of GDP during the next Parliament. The Times World Affairs editor Catherine Fulp, though, questioned the timing of the announcement.
So Starmer's been bounced into this because of his White House visit. He wants to be able to show Trump that the UK is sort of stepping up. I suspect that a lot of the details are still to be worked out, and this is a Trump card, if you don't mind the pun, before he goes to the White House.
Meanwhile, Reuters is reporting that Volodymyr Zelensky plans to travel to Washington on Friday to meet Donald Trump. It comes as newswires report that Ukraine has agreed terms with the US on a crucial minerals deal. Local Ukrainian media adds that the US intends to make a financial commitment to Ukraine, which will be determined separately. It also says the agreement does not contain clear security guarantees. Elsewhere, the chief executive of NHS England has resigned as ministers seek close control over the running of the health service. Amanda Pritchard brought forward her departure after the health secretary Wes Streeting made it clear he wanted a different approach and far greater oversight of the day-to-day running. Both sides have downplayed suggestions that Pritchard was forced out, but Streeting reportedly said he wanted new leadership to bring speed and urgency to radical reforms. Josh Fenton-Glynn is a Labour MP and member of the Health Select Committee.
The NHS is having to change the way it works, and the NHS is a large institution, and large institutions are a bit like oil tankers, so they do need to shift the way that they work, and it will always be a kind of negotiation. You'll always get some pushback. I don't think it's an NHS problem. I think it's just part of the struggle of trying to make change in big organisations.
And the government says it will expand help for vulnerable families struggling with fuel bills after the energy regulator raised the price cap for the third consecutive time. From April, the average energy bill for many households in England, Scotland and Wales will rise by £111. And for a news bulletin when you want it, search for the Times News Briefing on the Times Radio app.
Kate Borsay with you, Tuesday, February the 25th. We're marching, of course, to the end of the month. Don't forget, February is a short one, much to the relief of many, and soon spring will arrive, if it hasn't felt like it already. I'm not just on my own, though. Michael Binion, the Times' former diplomatic editor and current leader writer, joins me here in the studio. Good evening, Michael.
Good evening, Kate.
And Zoe Strimple's with us, the historian and columnist. Hi, Zoe. Hi, Kate. Good evening. I gather you two have been moonlighting behind my back, by the way, speaking to Ed Basie on Friday. How very dare you?
Yes, that was quite fun. Yes, we had a bit of a... we didn't really have a ding-dong. We had quite a good discussion about all sorts of stuff.
Yes, and it was actually nice to be in the studio, so that was...
Yes, Zoe.
Sadly, this is a bit, burning the mid... This is too late for me,
Yeah,
Kate.
I know. Babies and everything else means that Zoe comes to us from home, but the quality of the content, of course, is still absolutely first rate. We are going to talk about the UK's increase to defence spending, but before we go to that, we have seen a couple of significant news lines break from our colleagues at Sky News, but also via the FT and Reuters this evening as well. So this picture is starting to emerge of a signed minerals deal between the Ukraine and the United States, and a visit planned by President Zelensky to the United States as well this week. Let's speak to Harriet Alexander, who's the senior US reporter for The Times. Harriet, good evening.
Hello.
Things are moving along a little bit, aren't they? First of all, what do we know about the minerals deal that we understand has now been signed by the United States and Ukraine?
Well, we know that this is something that Donald Trump has wanted for several weeks. He's had his eye on this. He sent his Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, out there to try and negotiate this. Zelensky initially rebuffed this idea, said that he didn't want anything to do with that. And that infuriated Trump, which sparked last week's rather aggressive statements from Trump when he called Zelensky a dictator and said, he needed essentially to move on. But now it seems that they have been able to reach an agreement, so it's moving pretty quickly. Essentially, this is going to give the US access to Ukraine's rare earth mineral reserves in return, basically, for guarantees for their own security as part of this peace deal.
Okay, I'm just trying to get across some of the detail, and as I understand it, we were speaking to a Ukrainian MP last week, Harriet. This was something initially put forward by President Zelensky, but Donald Trump's team came back with a demand for $500 billion worth of rare earth mineral assets, and that was quickly turned down by President Zelensky, as you might expect, and we've come to a situation now where clearly the financial agreement has been made. It no longer contains, this is just some of the detail that we're starting to get through, it no longer contains an initial demand by the United States for a right to $500 billion worth in potential revenue from the resources. And as far as we understand, there is no mention in the document about security guarantees to Ukraine in the wake of any ceasefire deal with Vladimir Putin. We know that Kyiv has been asking for this repeatedly. So that's just what we understand. Detail is still scant at the moment, so I'm super interested to know what's going to be in it. Rare earth metals, by the way, they're used to produce weapons, wind turbines, electronics, other products really vital in the modern world. There's also things like lithium deposits for, batteries, titanium production, a lightweight metal used in the construction of everything from aeroplanes to power stations. So if you're wondering what these minerals are, what these rare earth elements are, then this is the picture. Okay, and we understand, Harriet, that President Zelensky is to visit Donald Trump in Washington on Friday, the day after Starmer's visit.
Yes, that's right. This is a meeting which has been obviously hastily arranged, but I think it's probably urgent for Zelensky to get there to make sure his side of this is heard. Of course, there was already the meeting in Saudi Arabia between US and Russian officials that Ukrainians were not present at. That left obviously a very bad taste in the mouth of many in Kyiv. They were concerned at this, so I think Zelensky's visit to Washington will be very welcome among Ukrainians.
Yeah, and look, Donald Trump has had a busy week, but that is typical of Donald Trump. Okay, well, we're starting to get more detail through, and we'll keep our listeners updated during the evening. But we understand that Ukraine has agreed terms with the United States on a minerals deal, and President Zelensky is to visit Washington on Friday. Harriet, thank you for bringing us the detail.
No problem.
Harriet Alexander there, who is a senior US reporter for The Times. So, let's discuss, shall we, Michael Binion and Zoe Strimple. Michael, first of all, a minerals deal that is in part about paying back the United States for some of the aid that they've provided to Ukraine. But as I understand it, it will in part also be kind of a future down payment for some US involvement in Ukraine if a peace deal is negotiated. That is what has been talked up. There's no security guarantees in the draft that's been seen by a couple of sources. But it is not just about repaying the United States. It's also to act as a down payment as well.
Yes, and that seems rather odd. I mean, it's a rather mercenary approach to security, isn't it? You know, we'll guarantee security, we'll keep peace in the world as long as you pay us enough to do it. I mean, that's what mercenary armies used to do. And the idea of linking security to we need this and we need that for us alone, you know, the United States will have a sort of monopoly. You may think that Ukraine will need all the money they can get from exports of these rare earth materials, to rebuild their country if and when we get some kind of peace deal. But that seems to be the case, that's what Donald Trump is now looking for, and it's just another indication of his shock and awe tactics. I mean, he put out a whole series of absolutely unbelievable demands and extraordinary statements about 3 weeks ago, and the after effect of that is quietly rolling in, just to his satisfaction. I mean, as we are now about to see, the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, is going to Washington with, under his belt, the promise of an increase in defence spending. That was one of the key things that Trump said that he wanted to see from all his allies, and he more or less said, if you don't do that, frankly, we're going to abandon you in NATO. So all this sort of tough talk, it does seem to have produced results.
I mean, Zoe, Donald Trump likes a deal, the art of a deal. This seems to be, I mean, we don't know all the detail yet, but when I first heard, in fact, I saw a draft of this deal a couple of weeks ago, not a couple of weeks ago, well, yeah, maybe a week or so ago, and my sort of first initial thought was, I mean, yes, I suppose if the US are wielding a lot of power over Ukraine, if they've paid the lion's share of military aid and support, according to them, by the way, those figures don't always stack up when you add everything in that European countries have given, but anyway, that this is a genius move by Donald Trump. If you're talking about a business deal, this is a good deal potentially for the United States.
There's some interesting cleverness to this deal because it is kind of managing to find a way to bake in U.S. financial support for Ukraine, potentially its defense, but in a way that serves the U.S. as well, which takes care of this kind of this growing isolationism among Trump's supporters. The idea that which is growing around populist parties around Europe as well, and here as well, that we shouldn't just be forking out all this money for countries that are thousands of miles away. So that kind of takes care of that in quite a clever way. But I think what Michael says is right, which is that is it actually reassuring to think of a kind of mercenary new era of defense? You could argue maybe that it's always been somewhat behind the scenes like that, a quid pro quo. But this does seem especially kind of in your face. We'll pay to keep you from being taken over by this kind of rogue dictator if we can lay claim to all of your minerals that you might need in future. So yeah, that's a little bit sinister. And also, I think the flip side to that is if that's the position being taken, what does that mean when an enemy like Russia, or not that the U.S. appears to be considering Russia an enemy now, but or any other enemy that may arise, or China or whatever, suddenly has a mineral deposit or something that the U.S. wants. Does that then mean all bets are off? Of course, there's never going to be any kind of war. Everything has to come down to tradable kind of commodities. I think that is actually a really dangerous new era, because I think what we see over and over again is that these things do come unstuck, and that I think is something that Keir Starmer miraculously has finally understood.
Well, of course, this reads across immediately to the Taiwan situation, because Taiwan makes the bulk of the world's chips that the world wants, and America desperately needs them. And,
Computer chips.
Yes, computer chips. Yes, not fry. It makes a few of those, but no, computer chips, the absolute core of most modern technology. And the Americans have been pushing to have a greater share of that market, and they're more or less suggesting that if, they can get their hands on some of these vital computer chips, then they'll be more willing to defend Taiwan against China.
Well, yeah. Do they want the computer chips, or do they want the potential revenue from the resources? Where are they going to take the resources? Are they going to export the resources? Are they just going to lay claim to any profit that those resources
that's not quite clear yet, but certainly Trump sees that this all this huge expense that America is forking out for buying these things is part of his idea that other countries are taking advantage of America.
Yeah. One thing that this does do, of course, is it puts US interest in Ukrainian assets. In other words, in Ukrainian areas, lands, territory. So, is that a security guarantee enough?
Well, in a way, it is, yes.
In itself,
yes.
because Russia are less likely to reinvade if we reach a peace deal. That they're less likely to do that if they know that the US has interest in Ukrainian territory.
Yes, I think that is some sort of deal, because it's obviously in America's interest to defend what they've now got, or are about to get.
Yeah, ownership. The EU apparently offered its own win-win minerals deal with Ukraine, because you might say, well, hang on a minute, European countries have given a hell of a lot of money to President Zelensky. What about us in this deal making? Why does the US get to walk off with lots of cash? But Europe's Commissioner for Industrial Strategy, Stefan Sejourne, said that he'd pitched a rival proposal to Ukrainian officials that he met in Kyiv during a visit this week. This is the European own agreement on critical minerals. I don't know where this stands after the apparent signing of Donald Trump and President Zelensky on their deal. Zelensky saying, by the way, at a press conference on Sunday, I will not sign what 10 generations of Ukrainians will have to pay back. That was one of his lines in the sand. So it'll be interesting to see what the final text looks like on this. Let's go to Keir Starmer, Zoe Strimple, and his increase of defence spending from 2.3 to 2.5% by 2027. What do you make of that?
Well, I'm impressed. I mean, to me, this is the first good decision that Keir Starmer has made. I mean, he seems to have understood with some moral clarity. He's gone big. He has allowed, there's real politique here. Trump is basically forcing this. Another thing, I mean, I'm very loath to kind of give Trump straight-faced credit, but I mean, he is a lot is happening by way of a kind of ripple effect, and I just think the way he seems to have understood that if we don't have a Britain that's capable of defending itself against quite clear threats on many fronts and in many, from cyber, from actual potential military offense, from Russia, then the NHS won't be relevant if Russia kind of continues unabashed through Europe or whatever. So I think he's in a way he's spelling out quite an extreme vision, which is that this is something that is worth taking from another pot, i.e. foreign aid, because we won't have a society to defend, quite possibly, if we don't sort out defense spending. And you don't usually, we haven't seen that level of moral clarity, or not even moral clarity, geopolitical clarity around defense since Blair, in decades. So I think it's obviously what had to happen. But I think it's impressive. I'm glad I'm seeing it come from Starmer. I was not, 100% sure he would have the kind of clarity to go for that.
A thumbs up from Zoe Strimple. We spoke to James Cartledge, the Shadow Defence Secretary, earlier, who told me that he gave his support to the Prime Minister's decision, but said that Starmer did need to do more.
I think that in the current climate, where we face profound threats to our country, and where the public finances are tight, it's not unreasonable to increase defence spending and use some of the aid budget. If your main threat is from these peer military countries, Russia, China and so on, and particularly in our case Russia, then the only thing we can invest in that will boost our deterrence, in my view, is defence. And so I do support what they've done today, and indeed at the weekend I called for higher defence spending funded in part by the aid budget.
Michael Binion.
Yes, well, of course, everyone regrets the drop in aid budget, and it comes particularly at a hard time for those in desperate need, because the Americans have also cut their foreign aid, and quite drastically, and a whole lot of very important projects, vaccinations across the world, polio inoculations, things of that kind, they will suffer. And those countries that have been trying to do the right thing with foreign aid will find suddenly they're only halfway there and it will dry up. But needs must, and the fact is that if they'd tried to find this money from the health service or from education or whatever, there would have been an absolute outcry, and that has been the difficulty for Starmer all along. He would like to have done
Well, those
this.
are protected budgets as well.
They are.
You would have had an issue, wouldn't they?
You would. I mean, protected up to what point? If we're talking about the verge of war, which luckily we're not on, then almost everything is up for grabs. But I mean, it is the right thing to do, and it's regrettable, and Starmer himself regretted cutting the aid budget, but it had to happen.
We spoke to Lee Turner earlier, former British ambassador to Ukraine. I asked him why the Prime Minister hadn't increased defence spending earlier.
Defence spending has been falling continuously since the Cold War. It got about 2.5% in 2010. We then had a massive financial crisis. So yes, we had to take some difficult decisions, although we always stayed above the NATO target. But it was actually in 2019, under Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, we had the largest sustained increase in defence spending since the Cold War. At that point, it went up to 2.3%. It's been around there since. It's a significant increase. But at the election, we said, yes, we now need to go even further to 2.5%. And we now think we need to go further and faster still, because basically the trend is reversing towards higher defence spending, and we recognise that.
It turns out as well, the Times reporting this evening that the boost in defence spending was only secretly decided over the weekend. The Foreign Aid Minister was given just a day's notice, so she was only told yesterday about this change. So it does appear that Keir Starmer's had sort of has been fleet of foot over this, Zoe, which you commend. But I suppose, possibly at the expense of kind of doing over a couple of his ministers.
Yes, but I think, as we've been saying on the program, the breaks. I mean, you have to, I think in this case there's just no strong argument for not doing what he's done, basically. And I think that development, foreign aid, of course, it's unfortunate, but come on, I mean, this is like there can't be a contest between that and the safety of sovereign United Kingdom from very real threats. So.
Phil's been in touch. Can you please mention that if we'd supported Ukraine in knocking the stuffing out of Putin's forces, we would not now be needing to rearm for a future larger conflict. The Ukrainians were giving their blood while NATO was giving money. There is no comparison between the two. Handyman's been in touch. Somebody will need to watch very carefully who does the mining in Ukraine and who takes the profit, because I can imagine that Trump Mining Incorporated will be grabbing all of the profit, having obtained it at the expense of the American taxpayer. And another lengthy message here that I'll dive into as soon as
Those are very incisive, good comments there. I have to say, well done, listeners.
Michael Binion, Donald Trump visits the White House on Thursday. Keir Starmer visits Donald Trump at the White House on Thursday. We've had a few people say that he needs to kind of explain to Donald Trump that if he gives in to Russia, Russia's just going to become emboldened by that. Sort of all versions thereof. I mean, you don't go into the White House to give advice to Donald Trump, do you?
Not really, no. You go in to schmooze and to be nice and to sort of play the game and remind him of his Scottish mother and remind him of the royal family and offer the prospect, which I think is in the offing, of a state visit, which he would love. He likes all that. And so you go in to charm him and to sort of say, of course, all this is a really useful initiative. We have to be careful, nevertheless, as I'm sure you will be, that we don't sell Ukraine down the river kind of thing. He'll put it more diplomatically. He'll say it does mean we have to be very aware of the pitfalls of what you're proposing and try to show that the Europeans, of course, will support everything Donald Trump proposes,
which is a bit of an exaggeration at best. But I think that's the way to play it. I mean, Trump doesn't like to be confronted. I think Macron got that message and did it pretty well. He didn't confront him, but he made the European voice clear. He reminded...
He correct him on a few points as well, which
He
was
did.
good.
He did. When he was talking about the difficult stuff at the press conference, he spoke in French, and he talked about the sort of things where they didn't agree. But nevertheless, I think he also played up the fact that Trump had a very successful visit to France in his first presidency, and they got along pretty well, apparently.
Yes. And the wives.
All that, it's important. That's how it goes. I mean, everything is personal for Trump.
I wonder, Zoe, what Keir Starmer's version of Dear Donald is, because that's what Macron kept saying, didn't he? Which is Cher Donald.
Yeah, that sort of easy kind of bonhomie with the wine flowing, that kind of vibe.
What should Starmer bring as a present to, apart from extra defence spending, what should Starmer bring as a present to the president?
I mean, I was just thinking of Millet bringing a chainsaw to Elon Musk and thinking, I'm not sure that I can think of the equivalent kind of appropriate MAGA. But I was thinking maybe there's room, because I don't think Keir is going to pull off that sort of what Michael just said, that kind of I don't think he has a diplomatic aura that's very convincing in a way that would
okay.
Trump. So I think he's going to have to go blunt, and I think he could. There's maybe a bit of a way to play it with Trump that he would respect if you just said, "Look, don't appease," speaking quite plainly, and that's probably what Starmer is best at. So I'm thinking what he brings is his kind of deadpan, kind of blunt self.
Zoe Strimple and Michael Binion with us. When we come back, we'll hear from Britain's strictest head teacher. She's written been interviewed in the Times tomorrow. She's on breakfast actually tomorrow morning, but she is laying into middle class soft parenting tactics. We'll do that in just a second.
Carol Walker, tonight from 10 on Times Radio.
The Prime Minister says the government will increase defence spending to 2.5% of our national wealth. We'll have reaction and assess how it could affect Keir Starmer's meeting with President Trump on Thursday. And as farmers heckle the Environment Secretary, we'll discuss how the changes to inheritance tax will affect the rural economy.
Carol Walker, tonight from 10 on Times Radio.
That was the travel. Now the weather. Chris.
Thanks, Sarah. A chance of rain today with low pressure bringing some cloudy patches and some showery spells later in the day.
If an Audi's on your mind, now's the time. There's only 3 days to receive £750 off a new Audi ordered by the 28th of February and delivered by the 30th of June. Start your search at audi.co.uk or visit your local Audi centre.
In the southeast, you'll see sunny spells well into the Audi noon. Afternoon.
Audi. Vorsprung durch Technik. T's and C's apply. £750 discount applied on purchase. Retail customers only.
They say money never sleeps. But don't let your pension keep you up at night. Instead, combine your old pots and manage them easily with Wealthify. And you could earn between £50 and £1,000 cashback when you transfer to our personal pension. That's why the smart money's with Wealthify. To start your transfer, download our app or go to wealthify.com. Wealthify is authorised and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. Minimum investments apply. Registration closes 31st of July. T&Cs apply. Capital at risk.
This is what a gift in your will to Great Ormond Street Hospital Children's Charity sounds like. It sounds like childhood. Gifts in wills to Gosh Charity help fund the pioneering research, specialist treatments and extraordinary care that change young lives every day. To discover more about how a gift in your will could transform young lives, please search Gosh Legacy.
Kids need mobiles these days.
An 8-year-old shouldn't have a phone.
I don't do processed food for my kids.
What's wrong with chicken strips?
Are you second-guessing your parenting decisions? With hands-on experience from parents like me, Caitlin Moran, and a host of experts, the new parenting hub from The Times and Sunday Times helps you feel more confident in your decisions. Visit thetimes.com/parenting.
The Story, the
award-winning daily news podcast from The Times. Listen in the Times Radio app or wherever you get your podcasts.
The Evening Edition with Kate Borsay on Times Radio.
Now, should we have a return to this?
This boy and girl coming home from school look quite content with life. They're looking forward to an important date, dinner at home with the family. What's the matter? Doesn't that sound exciting to you?
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know how that ended. But the idea is that we're too soft on our kids. Catherine Birbalsingh, a prominent head teacher, has said that middle-class written parenting guidance is destroying working-class child rearing. And that parents should embrace being a tough authority figure. In an interview with The Times on parenting, Birbalsingh is known as Britain's strictest head teacher. So the culture and language that's being used means parents feel they're often not in a position of authority over their child. We'll go quite quickly on this one, Zoe Strimple. This is pertinent for you. How much of a boss lady are you over your new baby? Your newish baby?
Not at all, and I thought I might be that kind of parent, but I can tell I'm going to be the one who has no authority, who doesn't want to assume authority in any kind of obnoxious or strong way whatsoever. And I think what she's saying is it's actually quite unpleasant, because we know what authoritarian parents is, and in the 80s, whatever, we all grew up. It often involved quite a lot of smacking, belt use, things like that. Quite nasty stuff. And of course now it's not violence now, but I think there's a very nasty underpinning of being proudly authoritarian with children, and I hope I don't go there.
Okay, she says parents should stop giving their children choice in clothes and instead embrace being authority figures. Michael B.
Yes, well, some choice is necessary, but the point she's trying to make is there should be a clear framework for children. I think that is important. You don't have to be strict, you don't have to be kind of stony-faced and nasty, but you need to make clear these are the lines, these are the rules, these are basically what we all expect each other to do, and within that we can all have a nice time. And there are one hopes. And if you have a tantrum, basically get out of it, because we're not going to indulge you. I think a lot of what she's saying is quite true, because middle-class parents tend to have this, would she like a pink one or a blue one, or should we give her the choice? And you sort of say, well, look, we've chosen it, that's it. And I think I can see the point of that.
Were you the authority parent in your family?
Not particularly.
Or were you the soft touch?
Neither that either. I don't know. I mean, I have to ask my kids how they seem to have been.
I bet it was a walkovers area. It was an absolute walkover.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I do like fathers to be more of a walkover than them. I think there's something scary about screaming, shouting, angry fathers more than That's a particular.
It comes more naturally, I think.
Well, I don't know.
My father was the soft. It was the sort of unintimidating one. I just had this particular memory. I think being forced as a child to eat things is actually incredibly horrible and often abusive, to be honest. I just think people should not be forced to swallow things they find repulsive, and that seems to be her starting point. And I just think, let's not forget what it's like to be a child who's being forced to do things, and it's really unpleasant, and there's got to be other ways. But I completely agree with Michael about the framework. That's a bit different.
Okay. All right, we'll leave it there for time, but as ever, a delight to speak to both of you. Zoe Strimple, thank you to you. Michael Binion, thank you to you.
Value from the creative industries and creators to AI companies.
It's a mighty thing, artificial intelligence, and it has a mighty future. Isn't there a certain inevitability about this?
I mean, I think AI is fantastic in many ways. I'm certainly personally not anti-AI in any way. I think what's not inevitable is legalizing what's essentially the mass theft of IP to allow people to build these models. There are other ways of building AI. You don't need to take the life's work of the countries and ultimately the world's creators to build this. So I don't think that's inevitable.
Ed Newton Rex, the man behind that almost silent album. He was speaking to my colleague Paul Henley. BBC World Service, and this is NewsHour, live from London. Today, several African countries appointed a high-ranking group of former leaders to try to negotiate peace in the Democratic Republic of Congo, with Rwandan-backed rebels on the march in the east and planning, they say, to head all the way across this vast country until the capital, Kinshasa, falls. The M23 rebels have captured 2 major cities in the east, and already evidence is stacking up of some appalling atrocities having been committed. Survivors of a fire in a prison in Goma in the occupied east of the DRC, in which at least 130 women and 25 children were killed, have told the BBC they want justice, but they don't expect to get it. The fire happened during a mass breakout of more than 4,000 prisoners from the male section of the jail, as Rwandan-backed rebel forces, the M23, were fighting their way into Goma in late January. Survivors have told the BBC they were raped by fellow inmates who came over the wall from the neighbouring block. Our senior international correspondent, Orla Guerin, is in the eastern DRC and has been investigating. You may find parts of her report distressing.
I'm just walking into the women's wing, or what's left of it. You can see all around evidence of how intense the blaze was. There are burn marks here on all the walls and lots of ash at my feet. And there are a lot of belongings strewn around here. Piles of clothing, lots of cooking utensils. On the ground I can see a copy of the Bible, and everywhere marks of the flames. You can just imagine what was endured by the women and children who were trapped here, locked in, unable to get away. 2 survivors from the women's prison have come back for the first time. They want to tell their story. In silence, they walk through the charred ruins. 22-year-old Pascaline has her hand to her mouth in horror. Nadine, who is 23, is soon in tears. Pascaline, can you tell me what happened to you that night?
I was raped by 2 men. Violently. And passed out. While the second man was raping me, I came to. He told me he would kill me if I tried to escape. I was forced to let it happen, instead of losing my life. The unlucky ones were raped. The lucky ones got out without being raped.
That night, the prison was engulfed by chaos and by fire. Most of the guards long gone. By morning, thousands of the men had managed to break free. But the women were still trapped. Among them, Nadine, who was raped by 2 men and saw women and children dying around her. Nadine, can you tell me, how have you been coping since the attack?
When I sleep at night, I see scenes of everything I've seen here coming back to me. I see the dead again. As many dead bodies as I saw here until I got out. Maybe through you, someone can help us find justice, because we've suffered a bad savagery.
Do you have any faith in justice here in the DRC?
I don't, because instead of helping us, they were the ones who closed the door. Instead of opening the door, they let us die like animals in this prison.
I'm just coming into a tent in the grounds of a hospital in Goma. I've come here to meet a 25-year-old woman, Sifa Mohammed. Sifa was badly burned in the fire in the prison. Her right arm is very heavily bandaged. There's a bandage on her left hand. And you can see burn marks on her arm and on her face. She was in prison without being convicted of anything, she says. And she was with her 2-year-old daughter, Esther.
We were woken from our sleep by a fire in the middle of the night. We started to scream, "Fire! Help! We will die in this prison." But there was no one there and the doors were padlocked shut. There were no night watchmen. They had all gone.
Sif, I'm sorry to ask this question, but can you tell me what happened to your daughter, Esther?
I had her on my back when we wanted to escape. Something fell on her. Was it a bomb? I don't know. She died on the spot.
The full story of what happened in the prison may never be known. Sifa says no one is looking for the truth. She and the other survivors we spoke to have not been contacted by anyone. Not the rebels in control in Goma now, nor the government in Kinshasa, which used to run the prison.
Oligaren, in eastern DRC, we did ask the government in Kinshasa for a response to what the survivors had told us. So far, they haven't got back to us. Conservationists are raising the alarm over the decline of vulture populations across Africa. The campaign group BirdLife International says 7 of the continent's 11 vulture species are at risk of extinction. Researchers attribute the decline to mass poisoning, habitat loss, electrocution, and illegal trade, particularly in southern Africa. It's an issue that Darcy Ogada has also been looking at. She's based in Nairobi and is the North and East Sub-Saharan Africa Program Director at the Peregrine Front, which works to protect wildlife.
Across Africa, there's 2 big reasons for this. The first one that has been a bit more well publicized is about poisoning. Poisoning is the number 1 threat to vultures globally, and in Africa, it's largely linked to illicit pesticide poisoning. It can either be as a cause of human-carnivore conflict, so that is not directly targeting the vultures, but it's actually targeting carnivores like lions and hyenas. Another challenge is belief-based uses, because vultures, particularly the older vultures, only locate carcasses by sight, not by smell. So a lot of people believe that they have this excellent eyesight, which is actually true. So they use the heads because they believe that that will help them see into the future to predict things like gambling, success in some kind of elections, anything that, would help them predict into the future.
Presumably that's been around for a while. So do you know why things have got worse recently, or is it just cumulative over the years?
In terms of the human-wildlife conflict, I think there's a lot less space across Africa, of course, and globally that's true as well. So you have a lot more conflict between humans and wildlife just for land. In terms of the belief-based use, it's definitely something that has been used, traditionally for probably as long as people have been alive. But there's a lot more illicit trade that is happening, especially across borders of vultures, because they're becoming so scarce in certain countries, particularly in West Africa, that people are killing vultures, in neighboring countries and importing them into areas of Nigeria in particular, and also Benin, where the trade is really strong for belief-based use, practices with vulture parts.
Am I right in saying that vultures also are very important in terms of the wider ecosystem?
Yeah, absolutely. They are definitely nature's cleanup crew. They provide a free service, which is basically scavenging carcasses, and certain species also clean up food scraps around dump sites and abattoirs. So they're extremely important in terms of their effect on ecosystems. They really help to reduce potential reservoirs for disease transmission. We have strong feelings that, they can actually help to limit disease transmission for other wildlife species, for domestic animals, and even for humans.
And there was Darcy Ogada from the wildlife conservation organisation, the Peregrine Fund, speaking to me from Nairobi. Now, if you've got clear skies, and even better, a view of the horizon, then just after sunset tonight, if there is still a tonight where you're listening, or if not, over the next few evenings, you could feast on a rare astronomical treat. It's called a planetary parade, an apparent apparent alignment of the other 7 planets in our solar system. You won't get another chance until 2040. Dr. Megan Argo is an astrophysicist from the University of Central Lancashire. First off, I asked her whether she was able to see the planetary parade.
I have seen it a few times we've had most of the planets in the sky over the last month or so I have seen it a few times. I've come outside to look for it tonight. It was beautifully clear until about 10 minutes ago, and now it's clouded over.
Right. So what's the trick? Because I guess most people can probably spot Venus, this sort of bright light in the evening sky. Take us from there, briefly, around the others.
Sure. Yeah, Venus is the most obvious one after the sun goes down. So even when the sky is still light, you won't be able to miss Venus. It's the brightest thing over in the west. If you want to see Mercury and indeed Saturn, if you look down from Venus towards the horizon just after the sun has gone down, you will do better if you've got binoculars, and you will need a good, clear western horizon. So the best vantage point is high up a building or up a hill if you've got one nearby, away from trees, away from buildings that block your view. That's the best way to see Mercury and Saturn both together in the low horizon. And then going the other direction, going up into the sky, so you go round from Venus in the other direction, you'll get to Jupiter again, which is really quite bright. At the moment is the only thing I can just about see poking through the clouds. And then you carry on round to the left and you'll see Mars. Mars is the one that looks orange. So again, it's hard to mistake Mars for anything else.
Right. I mean, if you say it's hard to mistake Mars, I guess it could be, once it gets deep into the evening, though, for the rest of us amateurs, it could be difficult to distinguish some of those bright lights from stars.
The key way to tell a planet apart from a star is that planets don't twinkle and stars do, and that's to do with the atmosphere and the size of the object that you're viewing through it. So if you want to tell the difference, if you want to know for sure whether you've got Mars or Venus, look at Mars or a star, then look and see whether it twinkles. If it's twinkling, it's a star.
Right. Now, I said very deliberately this is apparent alignment because am I right in saying that, I mean, it's a bit of a misnomer?
It is. There's a lot of people thinking that they will all be in a line across the sky, and technically they are. It's just that line from our perspective here on the Earth looks like a circle. So what we're seeing is we're looking out into the plane of our solar system. So if you imagine a dinner plate with the sun at the centre, the planets orbit the sun. They go round in roughly circular orbits, and as you look out into the solar system from the Earth, sometimes they all appear in the same part of the sky from our perspective, and that's what we're seeing at the moment.
And that was Dr. Megan Argo taking us pretty carefully around the solar system, and you can see it for yourselves over the next few evenings if you're lucky.
Thank you for joining us here on the BBC World Service. In 10 minutes, People Fixing the World learns how artificial limbs are bringing hope in Gaza.
It is a survival kit, because if you are unable to move, you're unable to reach the food in the food trucks that are being prepared.
Then in the studio meets the artist and former Paralympian Mohamed Barangi.
Zabon. The biggest challenge has been the language barrier, not just in speaking, but in emotional expression too, which feels completely different here. I'm still struggling, but I've slowly made my peace with it.
And that's followed by the Arts Hour.
With Oscar-winning actor Renée Zellweger back as Bridget Jones, Marisha Wallace, the first black Sally Bowles, Hollywood star Harrison Ford enters the Marvel Cinematic Universe, music from Venezuelan singer Luzmira Zerba, and Samuel Jefferson on his TV series Berlin ER.
Now it's back to NewsHour and Tim Franks.
A deal has been reached with the United States on the joint exploitation of Kiev's mineral riches. Such an agreement has been a key demand of President Trump and the suspended president of South Korea, Yoon Suk-yeol, the man who last December declared he was imposing martial law to save his country from plotters within and threats from without, by which he meant the increasingly belligerent North Korea. That attempt to impose martial law only survived a matter of hours before lawmakers forced their way into Parliament and voted unanimously to block the president's move. The change of tone I mentioned is that pretty much ever since that day in early December, Mr. Yoon has been stoutly, even ferociously defiant. Today, at the final hearing of his impeachment trial, he apologised. So what might that mean for his prospects? He's also facing a criminal trial over the crisis. And what might it mean for the country, so deeply divided and facing a profound economic malaise at home and great uncertainty abroad? Well, earlier today, a man who might have ambitions to replace Yoon Suk-yeol as president, should he be forced now to leave office, came into the NewsHour studio. He's Ahn Chol-soo, a member of the National Assembly from the president's own party, the PPP. First, what does he make of Mr. Yoon's belated apology?
I think it is sincere, but it is disheartening. I saw a leader who once stood tall now appear vulnerable and defensive.
He faces a charge of insurrection. Do you support, firstly, the idea of a criminal trial for Mr. Yoon?
I'm not sure because I asked about that to many law professors and even they are divided.
Yeah, I mean, because some people say, look, he was guilty of a bad error of judgment. But, you know, it's not that serious. You know, martial law, it only lasted a few hours. It's not like what happened in 1980 when there was a coup and there was a massacre. And indeed, I mean, the polling suggests that the country is fairly evenly split on whether he deserves even to be impeached. If it is so clear-cut, why do you think that is?
I think it reflects the consolidation of far-right. It is a reaction to Black Mr. Jae Myung-lee. He is a ruler of the opposing party, but polarization isn't sustainable. So, to win future elections, the current ruling party needs to appeal to moderates who don't want extremism on either side.
Which leads me to my next question. If he is impeached, will you run to be South Korea's next president?
It's too soon. It's too soon to discuss candidacy. However, responsible leadership requires preparation. So I have my own kind of plan B. My plan B focuses on preparing for further strengthening Korea's future and including top-edge technologies and foreign affairs diplomacy.
But what you have just said, it sounds like a manifesto. Do you think you are the man who could bring this very divided country together?
I experienced both the parties, and there's many politicians I know in both parties. So maybe I'm the one who can consolidate and negotiate between parties and expand the people who can vote for us.
I guess, obviously, the much bigger issue here is whether you are the next president or somebody else is. South Korea faces enormous problems. How much peril do you think South Korea is in?
I think we are in a very important point that would decide whether our country would prosper in the future or just drop to the end. So I think President Trump give us threat as well as opportunity because he cut the supply chain from China, right? So that would be our chance to supply memory chips and displays, second batteries to our allies.
And in terms of the politics right now, how much of a threat do you think that is?
I think the status of Korea remains calm and it shows resiliency. I think we can be normalized within 3 months. If current president is impeached, we should elect next president within 60 days. So 2 months. So within 3 months, we will be very stabilized.
I'm Charles Su, Member of Parliament for South Korea, and possibly candidate for the president. Finally today, Clint Hill, the Secret Service agent who tried to save President John F. Kennedy during his assassination, has died at the age of 93. Mr. Hill famously leapt on the back of the president's limousine after Mr. Kennedy had been shot in Dallas, Texas in 1963. He was trying to shield the president from any further gunfire, but John F. Kennedy had already been mortally wounded. Speaking to the BBC in 2013, Clint Hill described that moment.
I was on the running board of the car immediately behind the presidential vehicle. I was on the left-hand side, and all of a sudden I heard an explosive noise over my right shoulder from the rear. seemed to be from an elevated position. I then started to look toward that noise, but my vision only got as far as the back of the presidential vehicle. And I saw what happened in the car. I saw the president grab at his throat, and he violently moved to his left. And I knew something was wrong, so I jumped from my position, and I ran toward the presidential vehicle with the intent of getting up on top of the rear of it to form a shield. But when the third shot was fired that hit the president in the right rear of the head, and there was blood and brain matter and bone fragments that came out of the wound, that material went all throughout the car, covered Mrs. Kennedy, the back of the car, and on myself as well. And when that happened, I was just about to get on the car. And then the driver accelerated. As I tried to get up, I had slipped because of the acceleration. I had to take a couple extra steps. I finally got up on the back of the car. And as I did so, Mrs. Kennedy came up in the trunk. She was trying to reach the material that came off the president's head. I got a hold of her and I put her in the back seat. And when I did that, the president fell to his left into her lap. You could see his eyes appeared fixed, and there was a severe wound in the upper right rear of his head. I assumed that it was a fatal wound.
Extraordinary recollection from Clint Hill, the US Secret Service agent who tried to save President John F. Kennedy during his assassination back in 1963. That's it from this edition of News Hour. From me, Tim Franks, and the rest of the team here in London. Thanks for your company.